And today I'm going to be talking about the 2009 Star Trek, directed by J.J. Abrams. Star Trek, released in 2009 and directed by J.J. Abrams, is about an alternate timeline version of the original Star Trek series, in which on the day of Captain Kirk's birth, a giant Romulan ship travels back in time through an anomaly in space and destroys the Federation ship, the USS Kelvin, that was sent to check on the anomaly, which happened to be the ship containing Kirk's father, who was the first officer, and his mother, who was currently in labor delivering Kirk. Kirk's father saves the lives of most of the crew of the ship, including him and his mother, but dies in the process. This event sets the original series off into a new timeline in which Kirk grows up without a father and becomes a down on his luck petty criminal who, with the help of Captain Pike, the first captain of the Enterprise, enlists in Starfleet and through the events of the movie rises to his destiny, one might say, and takes over as captain of the Enterprise. In these pictures here, we can see the Enterprise and Nero's ship, or the Romulan ship. Star Trek is full of different semantics and tropes of sci-fi, whether it be this movie, any of the other movies, or any of the shows. The idea of a quasi-militaristic peacekeeping organization that operates in space lends itself to a plethora of sci-fi semantics to pull from. The first being the final frontier, meaning space travel and exploration. Star Trek has always existed and operated in space, and this installment in the Trek universe is no exception. Through the film, we travel to alien planets, meeting Vulcans and Romulans, as well as some alien creatures. The gizmos of the movie include Star Trek classics like phasers and tricorders. I will talk more about those during the technology slide. Lastly listed here is the alternate timeline. This is an extremely popular trope in sci-fi. We see it done across many films and TV. However, I don't believe that I don't believe that in too many of them the entire list of main characters learns of this information, which is what happens in this film when future Spock tells Kirk that both him and Nero are from the future. And then Kirk relays this information to the bridge of the Enterprise, allowing present day Spock to conclude that they now live in an alternate timeline due to the events of the Romulan ship coming back and destroying the USS Kelvin. Now let's look at some of the different metaphors, allegories, and ideologies from the film. Firstly, here we have a big metaphor in the form of the United Federation of Planets, or Starfleet. The Federation is a metaphor for the United Nations. Both are highly organized peacekeeping organizations whose members represent many different groups of people. Also, both are quasi-militaristic. As far as allegories go, we have our main antagonists, the Romulans, as allegories for terrorism. In the film, the Romulans commit mass genocide by destroying the planet Vulcan, representing genocides committed by different groups throughout history. Lastly, the ideology that is present in all of Star Trek, the idea of racial integration. Throughout the shows and films, they use different aliens to show both the struggles between races and the benefits of overcoming those struggles. The film uses Spock as a prime example of racial integration, with his being half Vulcan, half human. Because of this, he is ridiculed by those on Vulcan. However, when he joins Starfleet on Earth, he is met with praise. Here is where the film starts to lose some of its steam. In terms of gender representation, we have Lieutenant Uhura, played by Zoe Saldana, who is the linguistics officer of the ship, and the only woman on the bridge, as well as Spock's mother, Amanda Grayson, played by Winona Ryder, who has maybe 5 to 7 minutes of screen time. When Uhura was introduced in the TV show, it was a huge deal. Nichelle Nichols was the first African American woman to have a featured role on a major television show. It was groundbreaking, but by the time we got to JJ's take on the franchise, that ground had already been broken. So the very idea of Uhura was not unimportant, but didn't carry the weight it did in the 60s. Because of this, Uhura gets boiled down to a basic love plotline that was, in my opinion, very poorly set up. With Spock, wherein she dictates that he place her on the Enterprise, even though she had been assigned to a different ship, and then the very next time we see them together, she's consoling him over the destruction of Vulcan and kissing him. Next we have Amanda Grayson, Spock's mother. There is really not much to say about her other than she had one conversation with Spock before he joins Starfleet. Then the next time we see her, she dies. I think it's plainly obvious here, but this movie fails the Bechdel test. Sexuality in this movie is very interesting because technically there actually isn't any. J.J. Abrams announced during the filming of the third film in this Trek trilogy that this version of Sulu was gay, which would mean that Sulu was gay in this first movie as well. However, when this was announced, actor George Takei, who played the original Sulu and who is in fact a gay man in real life, said that Sulu being gay is, quote, unfortunate, and that it was not in Gene Roddenberry's original view of the show. This is interesting to look at because it brings up a fascinating conundrum. This movie is an alternate timeline version of the original series due to the events of the Romulans and the Kelvin. If this is the only thing changing the timeline, then that would mean Sulu is in fact not gay, since according to Gene, he was not gay in the original series. I personally enjoy the change. Being a fan of the original series, the idea of Sulu being gay or straight was never something that was really touched on, and so it being changed or altered for these movies does not bother me, but instead excites me. What's easier than having one real representation of gender and one of sexuality? Having them both also be the movie's representation of race. Making a movie based on a franchise created in the 60s certainly doesn't help when trying to build a racially diverse cast. The movie's use of its only two racially diverse characters is not great, but it is at least a little understandable when you look at the time it was made and the genre it went into. 2009 saw J.J. Abrams bring Star Trek into the action genre in a way its previous movies had not yet done. This movie, while still a sci-fi film, leaned more into the action genre than previous Treks had, and because of this, most of the action and plot was centered around our white male leads. Sulu is given one great scene to show off his skills, in which he takes down a couple Romulans using his skills in fencing. Other than this, he is not given a lot to do, and as for Ahura, well, we already touched on that, on her contribution to the movie. When looking at class in this movie, the first representation we see is the same we see in every Star Trek, the military class rankings of Starfleet. Starfleet's military class system has been a part of it since the beginning and will continue to be. To get a more personal look at class, we have to look at Spock. Spock, being born half human, half Vulcan, was bullied and ridiculed all during his childhood by his peers for his human half, believing this half makes him more susceptible to emotions, something Vulcans have learned to live without. As an adult, we see Spock standing before the Vulcan High Command, receiving the news that he has been accepted into the Vulcan Science Academy, but rejects the offer after a few choice words were uttered from the Council's leader regarding Spock's mother. Here's a clip of that scene.
You have surpassed the expectations of your instructors. Your final record is flawless. With one exception, I see that you have applied to Starfleet as well.
It was logical to cultivate multiple options.
Logical, but unnecessary. You are hereby accepted to the Vulcan Science Academy. It is truly remarkable, Spock, that you have achieved so much, despite your disadvantage. All rise.
If you would clarify, Minister, to what disadvantage are you referring?
Your human mother.
Council. Ministers, I must decline.
No Vulcan has ever declined admission to this academy.
Then as I am half human, your record remains untarnished.
Spock,
You have made a commitment to honor the Vulcan way.
Why did you come before this council today? Was it to satisfy your emotional need to rebel?
The only emotion I wish to convey is gratitude. Thank you, ministers, for your consideration. Live long and prosper.
As you can see, the Vulcans are extremely high-minded. Let's get back into here. Openly admitting they believe themselves to be above humans. Another show of class in this movie, and probably the most interesting, is the Romulans. At 1 hour and 6 minutes into the movie, Nero tells Captain Pike that in his time this giant ship is a mining vessel, and that he chose a life of honest labor to provide for his family. Nero and his crew are a couple of blue-collar miners who never meant to get tied up into any of this, and happened to be off-world during the destruction of Romulus, watching it happen. It's the only time in the movie it's talked about, but it adds a very interesting layer to the villains of this story. Here we take a look at those gizmos from earlier, as well as some other tech, starting with some Trek classics, the phaser, tricorder, and communication device. The tricorder and communications device appear to operate the same as they do in the shows. The interesting one here is the phaser. In the show, the phaser has a sort of dial system where you can adjust the power level going through a couple different settings in power from stun to kill. In the movie, it appears to only have two settings that work by the firing chamber of the phaser switching between a red lit tip, which I assume is the kill setting, and a blue lit setting, which is most likely the stun setting. This change in design and function is a strange one because while it looks cool, it takes away from the original model's higher range of firing settings. We also have other Trek classics like the transporter room and the ship's onboard voice-operated computer system. The computer system could possibly be looked at as a kind of AI with its ability to talk and respond, but with its lack of ability to think for itself, it appears to be more like something that could become AI rather than AI itself. Some new tech we get from the film comes from the Romulans with their world drill and the red matter. The world drill is pretty self-explanatory. It's a mining ship. This drill would drill into presumably uninhabited planets for the crew to then mine. The more explosive tech comes in the form of this substance called red matter, that when shot into a planet or object creates a black hole. This black hole is what created the anomaly that brought Nero and Spock back in time. This red matter or black hole device is what destroys both Vulcan about halfway through the film and Nero's ship at the end of the film when Spock crashes future Spock's ship, which contained all the red matter, into Nero's ship, using up the rest of the red matter to create a giant black hole at the center of the ship, defeating Nero and his crew. As far as transhumanism goes, there really isn't any showing of that in this film. They do go into ideas of transhumanism in the shows with species like the Borg, but as for this movie, we don't really see anything like that. Finally, we come to our last slide. The announcement that J.J. Abrams would be doing a Trek reboot movie initially had many fans nervous. He wanted to bring the world of Star Trek to a new generation, and many who had never seen Star Trek were eager to see this movie based on the simple fact that J.J. would be directing it. His name recognition had soared in the past few years with projects like Lost and Felicity, although fans of classic Star Trek were reluctant to dive into this new Trek world. After the movie's release, however, many Trekkies were excited to see that JJ was able to breathe new life into an old franchise while still maintaining the heart of what Star Trek was. Of course, not every fan of the classics is a fan of the new, and there are some who were less than pleased with what JJ created. But many Trekkies, my family included, find a lot of enjoyment out of this new world for Kirk and his crew. JJ's interpretation on the world of Star Trek brought new life to an old universe, creating a new generation of Trekkies throughout the world.